This is Abdul Saad, clinical psychologist at Vital Mind Psychology here in Sydney, Australia. And today I come to you with the fourth video in this series looking at depression from various perspectives. In this video today, I want to take a much more detailed look at depression from a biological perspective, a physical perspective. And I'm going to be discussing the link between depression and inflammation, and introducing to you a model of depression which is based on the biochemical research into depression, looking at the molecular and biochemical basis of depression and of depressive symptoms. So in terms of detailing the link between depression and inflammation, if we think about the experience we have when we have the flu, which is a state in which we are more in an inflammatory state. Whenever we are sick, we feel listless, we're fatigued, we don't particularly want to socialize because we don't have a lot of energy, mood often diminishes. And this is an interesting observation because it really mirrors or parallels a lot of the symptoms that people experience when they're depressed. And this led to the thinking that perhaps there is a link between depression and inflammation. And in fact, that has been found that if we, for example, give people medications that increase inflammation in their body, they are more likely to develop depression. So what I want to do in this video is look at the link between depression and inflammation. Now, what is inflammation? Inflammation essentially is a biological response to threat or to injury within the body. And inflammation can be localized. So if you stub your toe, you burn yourself, you're going to get swelling, you're going to get inflammation that's localized to that site. And that's basically the immune system ramping up its activity to try and deal with that injury or with that sort of that threat. Whereas with systemic inflammation, this is inflammation which is widespread across the whole body, and it can affect multiple areas of the body, multiple organ sites. And I touched on this in my video entitled How the Narcissist Destroys Your Physical Health. So that might be a good one to watch in conjunction with this video. Now, so what's the link between depression and inflammation? To understand that, I'm going to talk you through a particular model or a particular biological pathway which has now been well established as it applies to depression. And that's called, so this is the inflammation theory or inflammation model or inflammatory model of depression. And there's a particular biochemical pathway called the Kynurenine pathway, which has relevance to the development and the maintenance of depression. So just summarizing what I've said so far is that there is a link between inflammation or the activation of the immune system and depression. And I'm going to go through that. So if we look at, as it relates to depression, where I like to start in explaining this particular model is the fact that, we all consume protein in our diet. And the protein that we consume contains the amino acids, which are the building blocks for the construction of our neurotransmitters. So the building blocks of protein are amino acids. And one amino acid, which is particularly relevant to depression, is an amino acid called tryptophan. So when we eat dietary protein, tryptophan, that protein is broken down into certain amino acids. Amongst them is tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is a building block or precursor to the production of serotonin, which I'm going to get to in a moment. But before we can make serotonin from tryptophan, tryptophan has to be further broken down into another metabolite called 5-hydroxytryptophan or 5-HTP. Now, 5-HTP has to cross the blood-brain barrier, get into the brain, where it is converted into serotonin. Now, many of you have of course heard of serotonin. Just fix up my R there, serotonin. And serotonin is a very important neurotransmitter or brain chemical which is involved in regulating and modulating our mood. It has very important functions also for gut function. And at a brain level, problems with serotonin, problems with the production of serotonin, or if there is increased reuptake of serotonin, that is, serotonin isn't remaining in the brain for as long as it needs to be in what's called the synaptic cleft, or the space between our brain cells, then that can lead to symptoms such as increased obsessive thinking, dark moods, negativity, hostility, lethargy, basically the whole constellation of symptoms that go with depression. Now, interesting thing to note about this pathway, serotonin is also the precursor to melatonin. So if there's anything that's disrupting our ability to make serotonin, we also can't make melatonin. And melatonin is the hormone which the brain produces in the evening, which prepares us for sleep, prepares us for getting into rest and digest, and is intimately involved in the production of growth hormone. So the pathway I've drawn here is how things should be working if we're on track, if we haven't got a whole lot of systemic inflammation and our body is able to break down from the protein, the tryptophan, 5-HTP, make it into serotonin, serotonin becomes melatonin, we've got stable mood and energy throughout the day, and in the evening we can go into a deep restful sleep, wake up the next day, repeat the process. Now, what's important to note here is to get from here to here, one of the things that you need is sufficient levels of stomach acid. So anything that's going to block the production of stomach acid can impair the ability of the digestive system to break down protein into tryptophan, into serotonin, melatonin. Now, so this is how we want things to be. Now, what occurs in inflammation? If our immune system, for whatever reason, is going haywire, if it's producing a lot of inflammatory molecules called cytokines, such as interleukin-6 or TNF-alpha, which when we measure for these molecules in the blood of people with depression, we consistently find that there are elevated levels of these inflammatory markers compared to people without depression. So we know that these are what are called biomarkers or biological markers for depression. And what I want to show you is what's happening. What do these inflammatory molecules, if the immune system is pumping them out due to inflammation, what can that do to this particular pathway? What happens is there's something called tryptophan steal, where the tryptophan that we need to make our serotonin and our melatonin is being shunted away from this anti-inflammatory pathway toward a pro-inflammatory pathway called the kynurenine pathway. So the tryptophan is basically shunted to this negative pathway through the activation of an enzyme called IDO. And the tryptophan is converted into a metabolite called kynurenine, and that is further converted into another metabolite called quinolinic acid. Now, quinolinic acid is especially nasty, this metabolite, and it's got what's called excitotoxic effects. So quinolinic acid actually activates receptors in the brain called the NMDA receptors, and I'll put that up here, NMDA receptors, and I'll just explain what I mean by all that. Okay. So once our tryptophan, due to high levels of inflammation, and that could be because we have some systemic inflammation due to a gut issue, we've got some problem with the integrity of our digestive tract. For example, if we're intolerant to wheat and we continue to eat wheat, then we've got undigested wheat proteins getting into the bloodstream. The immune system is activating all these inflammatory molecules, and that can actually contribute to depression. Psychological stress increases inflammation via the activation of our stress hormones, which is also, I've talked about in the video about the physical, how the narcissist destroys your physical health. But back to this, kynurenine is activated, that becomes quinolinic acid, and that activates these NMDA receptors in the brain. Now, quinolinic acid and the NMDA receptors are particularly toxic when they're hyperactivated, because this creates a state in the brain called excitotoxicity. So think of this pathway as the rest and digest pathway. Stable mood, restful state, where we're really in the the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest arm of our nervous system, is in charge. Whereas this pathway is inflammatory, and it's the sympathetic or fight-flight nervous system is in charge, because quinolinic acid is excitotoxic. And what that means is it ramps up the activity of our brain cells by activating the NMDA receptors, which are basically receptors which increase the activity of brain cells, but to the point where the brain cells actually can't keep up with that level of activity and they die. An example I give, it's like blasting someone 24/7 with loud music. And they just can't cope. It drives them crazy. That's what's happening in the brain through this inflammatory pathway. And the activation of these NMDA receptors actually activates the brain's immune system, called the microglia. And the microglia are these specialized immune cells in the brain that, when they're activated, basically begin to destroy brain cells. They kill our neurons. And the activation of this pathway accounts for a lot of the cognitive deficits and neurocognitive disturbances we see in major depressive disorder, especially chronic major depression, where the person experiences episode after episode, where we see the confusion, the brain fog, we see the impaired memory, the impaired decision making, largely due to this inflammatory pathway. So inflammation then plays an intimate role in the development and the maintenance of depression at a biochemical level. And this also has led to various treatments for depression. Now, amongst them is the fact that NMDA receptors are, this is a technical term, are antagonized. So think of an antagonist as something that blocks the activation of the receptor. So these receptors are calmed down, for example, by our good friend, can you guess it? Magnesium and zinc. So magnesium and zinc act as NMDA receptor antagonists. They actually physically gate the NMDA receptor so that they're not activated prematurely, creating this biochemical mess that we see in severe depressive disorders. So, and this has spawned research into the therapeutic and antidepressive effects of zinc, of magnesium. We know, for example, we can also quell this inflammatory pathway by eating an anti-inflammatory diet, a diet that is low in processed carbohydrate, white sugars, white flours, that's high in high quality, easy digested proteins. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really keen on high quality whey protein isolate powder as a highly bioavailable, easily digested form of protein where we can get our tryptophan and convert it, given that we are reducing inflammation by making sure that we're not magnesium or zinc deficient. The other nutrient which has got high levels of anti-inflammatory properties is fish oil, in particular the essential fatty acids that make up omega-3 fatty acids, which are the EPA and the DHA. And EPA especially, and EPA-rich fish oils can also clamp down on inflammation in depression. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of the inflammatory model of depression, and how by targeting inflammation in major depression we can actually see therapeutic effects where people feel better, more energized, they get more restful sleep, because we see that the pro-inflammatory pathway really interferes and cuts off the normal pathway via which tryptophan is metabolized into serotonin and then melatonin. So hopefully that has been of assistance. I look forward to seeing you soon with a brand new series. This now wraps up the 4 videos on depression. And the new series is still in the pipeline, so I hope to catch you soon. Press like, leave some comments, let me know what you thought about the video. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up. Also, check me out on Facebook. We will be having another live meeting soon where I can answer your questions. Okay, I'll see you soon, God willing. Take care. Bye-bye.